You can put up with that. Surely you can. I've just had panini with spicy chicken, and I now have some cappuccino. We shall see how it goes, shall we, with the noise. All right. Moby Dick, Herman Melville, chapter 76. All previous chapters. All previous chapters are available on my YouTube if you want to look there. I think they are, anyway. Right, chapter 76, the battering ram. Ere quitting for the nonce, the sperm whale's head, I would have you, as a sensible physiologist, simply, particularly remark its front aspect in all its compacted collectedness. I would have you investigate it now with the sole view of forming to yourself some unexaggerated, intelligent estimate of whatever battering ram power may be lodged there. Here is a vital point, for you must either satisfactorily settle this matter with yourself or forever remain an infidel as to one of the most appalling but not the less true events perhaps anywhere to be found in all recorded history. You observe... We may abandon this, we'll see. It's not as if I'm speaking quietly. You observe that in the ordinary swimming position of the sperm whale, I can barely hear myself, the front of the head presents an almost wholly vertical plane to the water. You observe that the lower part of the front slopes considerably backwards, so as to furnish more of a retreat for the long socket which receives the boom-like lower jaw. You observe that the mouth is entirely under the head, much in the same way, indeed, as though your own mouth were entirely under your chin. Moreover, you observe that the whale has no external nose, and that what nose he has, his spout hole, is on the top of his head. You observe that his eyes and ears are at the sides of his head, nearly 1/3 of his entire length from the front. Wherefore, you must now have perceived that the front of the sperm whale's head is a dead, blind wall, without a single organ or tender prominence of any sort whatsoever. Yes. Furthermore, you are now to consider that only in the extreme lower, backward sloping part of the front of the head is there any slight vestige of bone. And not till you get near 20 feet from the forehead do you come to the full cranial development. So that this whole enormous boneless mass is one wad. Finally, though, as will soon be revealed, its contents partly comprise the most delicate oil. Yet you are now to be appraised of the nature of the substance which so impregnably invests all that apparent effeminacy. Effeminacy? In some previous place I have described to you how the blubber wraps the body of the whale, as the wind wraps an orange. Just so with the head, but with this difference. About the head, this envelope, though not so thick, is of a boneless toughness, inestimable by any man who has not handled it. The severest pointed harpoon, the sharpest lance darted by the strongest human arm, impotently rebounds from it. It is though the forehead of this sperm whale were paved with horses' hooves. I do not think that any sensation lurks in it. Well, Mark, harpoon the child. There she blows, avast. It's not just the child, though. It's not just the child, it's the adults as well. The child may be more piercing, but the adults are just as loud. Bethink yourself also of another thing. When two large loaded Indiamen, that's the kind of boat there, Indiamen chance to crowd and crush towards each other in the docks, what do sailors do? They do not suspend between them, at the point of coming contact, any merely hard substance like iron or wood. No, they hold there a large round wad of tow and cork, enveloped, is it tow or tow? Enveloped in the thickest, toughest of oxhide. That bravely and uninjured takes the jam, which would have snapped all other oaken handspikes and iron crowbars. By itself, this sufficiently illustrates the obvious fact I drive at. But supplementary to this, it has hypothetically occurred to me that as ordinary fish possess what is called a swim bladder in them, capable at will of distension or contraction, and as the sperm whale, as far as I know, has no such provision in him, considering to the otherwise inexplicable manner in which he now depresses his head altogether beneath the surface, and anon swims with it high elevated out of the water, considering the unobstructed elasticity of its envelope, considering the unique interior of his head, it has hypothetically occurred to me, I say, that those mystical lung-celled honeycombs there may possibly have some hitherto unknown and unsuspected connection with the outer air, so as to be susceptible to atmospheric distension and contraction. If this be so, fancy the irresistibleness of that might to which the almost impalpable and destructive vol elements contributes. Now, Mark. It's not you, Mark. Mark. Now, Mark, unerringly, impelled this dead, impregnable, uninjurable wall, and this most buoyant thing within, there swims behind it all a mass of tremendous life, only to be adequately estimated as piled wood is by the cord, and all obedient to one volition, as the smallest insect. So that when I shall hereafter detail to you all the specialities and concentrations of potencies everywhere lurking in this expansive monster, when I shall show you some of his more inconsiderable braining feats, I trust you will have renounced all ignorant incredulity, and be ready to abide by this, that although the sperm whale stove a passage through the Isthmus of Darien, and mixed the Atlantic with the Pacific, you would not elevate one hair of your eyebrow. The Isthmus of Darien, that's in Panama, I think. It's the narrow gap where the Panama Canal is now. Through the Isthmus of Darien and mix the Atlantic with the Pacific, you would not elevate one hair of your eyebrow. For unless you own the whale, you are but a provincial and sentimentalist in truth. But clear truth is a thing for salamander giants only to encounter. How small the chances for the provincials, then? What befell the weakling youth lifting the dread goddess's veil at Sais? Sais, S-A-I-S. Sais. End of chapter. Short chapter, the next one's short as well. Chapter 77, the Great Heidelberg Tongue. The Great Heidelberg Tongue. Now comes the bailing of the case. But to comprehend it all right, you must know something of the curious internal structure of the thing operated on. Regarding the sperm whale's head as a solid oblong, you may, on an inclined plane, sideways divide it into two coins. That's coins Q-U-I-N-S. Whereof the lower is the bony structure, forming the cranium and jaws, and the upper an unctuous mass, wholly free from bones, its broad forward end forming the expanded vertical apparent forehead of the whale. At the middle of the forehead, horizontally subdividing this upper coin, and then you have two almost equal parts, which before were naturally divided by an internal wall of a thick tendinous substance. The lower subdivided part is in the side it says of 238, hang on, size 238, it says Sais, the dread goddess's veil at Sais. Sais was an ancient city upon the Nile and the site of shrines to Neith and Osiris. In Schiller's poem The Veiled Statuette in Sais, a youth lifts the veil of a statue at Sais in pursuit of truth and dies young and unhappy. There you go. Where did I get to? Hang on. hang on, right, thick tendinous substance. The lower subdivided part, called the junk, is one immense honeycomb of oil formed by the crossing and recrossing into 10,000 inflated cells of tough elastic white fibres throughout its whole extent. Who knew we'd be talking about a whale's junk and describing it so carefully? The upper part, so the upper part known as the case, may be regarded as the great Heidelberg ton of the sperm whale. And I think a ton is a kind of barrel. I think a kind of barrel. And as that famous great tierce is mystically carved in front, so the whale's vast plaited forehead forms innumerable strange devices for emblematical adornment of this wondrous ton. Moreover, as that of Heidelberg was always replenishing with the most excellent of the wines of the Rhenish valleys, it says Rhenish valleys, but I think Rhenish, so the ton of the whale contains by far the most precious of all his oily vintages, namely the highly prized spermaceti in its absolutely pure, limpid, and odoriferous state. Nor is this precious substance found unalloyed in any other part of the creature. Though in life it remains perfectly fluid, yet upon exposure to the air after death it soon begins to concrete, sending forth beautiful crystalline shoots as when the first thin delicate ice is just forming in water. A large whale's case generally yields about 500 gallons of sperm, though from unavoidable circumstances considerable of it is spilled, leaks and dribbles away, or is otherwise irrevocably lost in the ticklish business of securing what you can. I know not with what fine and costly material the Heidelberg ton was coated within, but in superlative richness, that coating could not possibly have compared with the silk and pearl-coloured membrane like the lining of a fine pelisse forming the inner surface of the sperm whale's case. It will have been seen that the Heidelberg ton of the sperm whale embraces the entire length of the entire top of the head, and since, as has been elsewhere set forth, the head embraces 1/3 of the whole length of the creature, then setting the length down at 80 feet for a good-sized whale, you have more than 76 feet for the depth of the ton, and it is lengthwise hoisted up and down against a ship's side. As in decapitating the whale, the operator's instrument is brought close to the spot where an entrance is subsequently forced into the spermaceti magazine. He has therefore to be uncommonly heedful, lest a careless, untimely stroke should invade the sanctuary and wastingly let out its invaluable contents. It is this decapitated end of the head also which is at last elevated out of the water, and retained in that position by the enormous cutting tackles, whose hempen combinations on one side make quite a wilderness of ropes in that quarter. Thus much being said, attend now, I pray you, to that marvellous, and in this particular case, almost fatal operation, whereby the great whale's head, Heidelberg, almost fatal operation, whereby the sperm whale's great Heidelberg ton is tapped. So we have the next chapter? Yes. Yes, plenty of time. Plenty of time for the next one. Chapter 78. Made uncomfortable by the clinical description of a sperm whale's murder and horror. Yeah, I know. Sometimes it does get a bit gruesome, doesn't it, when it's talking about how the head is separated from the rest of the whale and so on. Yeah, I get you. I get that, certainly. And it has to get in quite detail of the anatomy of the whale, but yeah. Anyway, chapter 78, Cistern and Buckets. It sounds as if, don't porpoise. Oh, 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 oh. So it's cistern and buckets could be a little bit more of this, couldn't it? Incidentally, no, I'll talk about that later. Nimble as a cat, Tashtigo mounts aloft, and without altering his erect posture, runs straight out upon the overhanging mainyard arm to the part where it exactly projects over the hoisted ton. He has carried with him a light tackle called a whip, consisting of only two parts, travelling through the single sheaved block. Securing this block so that it hangs down from the yard arm, he swings one end of the rope till it is caught and firmly held by a hand on the deck. Then, hand over hand, down the other part, the Indian drops through the air till dexterously he lands on the summit of the head. There, still high elevated above the rest of the company, to whom he vivaciously cries, he seems some Turkish muezzin, calling the good people to prayers from the top of a tower. I assume muezzin means Muslim, basically, muezzin. No, what's the person who calls to prayer? The imam or whoever it is, anyway. A short-handled, sharp spade being sent up to him, he diligently searches for the proper place to begin breaking into the ton. In this business, he proceeds very heedfully, like a treasure hunter in some old house, sounding the walls to find where the gold is masoned in. But this time, the cautious search is over. By the time this cautious search is over, a stout iron-bound bucket, precisely like a well bucket, has been attached to one end of the whip, while the other end, being stretched across the deck, is there held by 2 or 3 alert hands. These last now hoist the bucket within the grasp of the Indian, to whom another person has reached up a very long pole. Inserting this pole into the bucket, Tashtego downward guides the bucket into the ton till it entirely disappears. Then, giving the word to the seamen at the whip, up comes the bucket again, all bubbling like a dairymaid's pail of new milk. Carefully lowered from its height, the full-freighted vessel is caught by an appointed hand and quickly emptied into a large tub. Then, remounting aloft, it again goes through the same round until the deep cistern will yield no more. Towards the end, Tashtego has to ram his long pole harder and harder, and deeper into the ton, until some 20 feet of the pole has gone down. My. Now, the people of Pequod had been bailing some time in this way. Several tubs had been filled with the fragrant sperm, when all at once a queer accident happened. Whether it is that Tashtego, that wild Indian, was so heedless and reckless as to let go for a moment his one-handed hold on the great cabled tackles suspending the head, or whether the place where he stood was so treacherous and oozy, for whether the evil one himself would have had it fall out so, without stating his particular reasons. How it was exactly, there is no telling now, but on a sudden, as the 80th or 90th bucket came suckingly up, my God, poor Tashtego, like the twin reciprocating bucket in a veritable well, dropped head foremost down into this great ton of Heidelberg, and with a horrible, oily gurgling went clean out of sight. Oof. You don't want to drown in a whale's spermaceti, do you? Man overboard! Cried Daggoo, who amid the great consternation first came to his senses. Swing the bucket this way, and putting one foot into it, so as the better to secure his slippery handhold on the whip itself, the hoisters ran him high up to the top of the head, almost before Tashtego could have reached its interior bottom. Meantime, there was a terrible tumult. Looking over the side, they saw before a lifeless head throbbing and heaving just below the surface of the sea, as if that moment seized by some momentous idea. Whereas it was only the poor Indian unconsciously revealing by those struggles the perilous depth to which she had sunk. At that instant, while Daggoo on the summit of the head was clearing the whip, which had somehow got foul of the great cutting tackles, a sharp cracking noise was heard, and to the unspeakable horror of all, one of the 2 enormous hooks suspending the head tore out, and with a vast vibration the enormous mass sideways swung, till the dread ship reeled and shook as if smitten by an iceberg. The one remaining hook, upon which the entire strain now depended, seemed every instant to be on the point of giving way, an event still more likely from the violent motions of the head. come down, yelled the seaman to Daggoo, but with one hand holding onto the heavy tackles so that if the head should drop, he would still remain suspended. The negro, having cleared the foul line, rammed down the bucket into the now collapsed well, meaning that the buried harpooner should grasp it, and so he hoisted out. "In heaven's name, man," cried Stubb, "are you ramming home a cartridge there? Avast! How will that help him? Jamming that iron-bound bucket on top of his head? Avast, will he?" "Stand clear of the bucket! Stand clear of the tackle!" cried a voice like a bursting of a rocket. Almost in the same instant, with a thunder boom, the enormous mass dropped into the sea like Niagara's tabletop from the whirlpool. The suddenly relieved hull rolled away from it, too far down her. That's strange. Too far down her glittering copper. Too far down her glittering copper, and all caught their breath as, half swinging, now over the sailors' heads and now over the water, Daggoo, through a thick mist of spray, was dimly beheld clinging to the pendulous tackles, while poor buried alive Tashtega was sinking utterly down to the bottom of the sea. But hardly had the blinding vapour cleared away when a naked figure with a boarding sword in his hand was for one swift moment seen hovering over the bulwarks. The next, a loud splash announced that my brave Keekeg had dived to the rescue. One packet rush was made to the side, and every eye counted every ripple as moment followed moment, and no sign of either the sinker nor the diver could be seen. Some hands now jumped into a boat alongside and pushed off a little from the ship. "Ah!" cried Daggoo all at once from his now quiet, swinging perch overhead, and looking further off from the side, we saw an arm thrust upwards from the blue waves. A sight strange to see, as an arm thrust forth from the grass over a grave. Both, it's both!" cried Daggoo again with a joyful shout, and soon after Keekeg was seen boldly striking out with one hand and with the other clutching the long hair of the Indian. Drawn into the waiting boat, they were quickly brought to the deck, but Tashtega was long in coming to, and Keekeg did not look very brisk. Now, how had this noble rescue been accomplished? Why, diving after the slowly descending head, Keekeg with his keen sword had made side lunges near its bottom, so as to scuttle a large hole there. Then, dropping his sword, had thrust his long arm far inwards and upwards, and so hauled out poor Tash by the head. He averred that upon first thrusting in for him, a leg was presented, but well knowing that this was not as it ought to be, and might occasion great trouble, he had thrust back the leg, and by a dexterous heave and toss had wrought a somersault, upon the Indian, and that with the next trial he came forth in a good old way, head foremost. As for the great head itself, that was doing as well as could be expected. And thus, through the courage and great skill in obstetrics of Keekeg, the deliverance, or rather delivery, of Tashtego was successfully accomplished in the teeth, too, of the most untoward and apparently hopeless impediments, which is a lesson by no means to be forgotten. Midwifery should be taught in the same course with fencing and boxing, riding and rowing. A couple more paragraphs. I know that this queer adventure of the gay headers will be sure to seem incredible to some landsmen, though they themselves may have either seen or heard of someone's falling into a cistern ashore, an accident which not seldom happens, and which much less reason too than the Indians, considering the exceeding slipperiness of the curb of the sperm whale's well. But peradventure, it may be sagaciously urged, how is this? We thought the tissued, infiltered head of the sperm whale was the slightest and most corky part about him, and yet thou makest sink in an element of far greater specific gravity than itself. We have thee there. Not at all, but I have ye, for at the same time poor Tash fell in, the case had been nearly emptied out of its lighter contents, leaving little but the dense, tendinous wall of the well, a double-welded, hammered substance, as I have said, much heavier than the sea water, and a lump of which sinks in like a lead almost. But the tendency to rapid sinking in this substance was in the present instance materially counteracted by the other parts of the head remaining undetached from it, so that it sunk very slowly and deliberately indeed, affording Keekeg a fair chance of performing his agile obstetrics on the run, as you may say. Yes, it was a running delivery, so it was. Now, had Tashtigo perished in that head, it had been a very precious perishing, smothered in the very whitest and daintiest of fragrant spermaceti, coffined, hearsed, and tombed in the secret inner chamber and sanctum sanctorium of the whale. Only one sweeter end can readily be recalled, the delicious death of an Ohio honey hunter who, seeking honey in the crotch of a hollow tree, found such exceeding store of it that, leaning too far over, it sucked him in, so that he died embalmed. How many, think ye, likewise have fallen into Plato's honey head and sweetly perished there? Done. They do tell stories of Scotsmen drowning in vats of whiskey. But yeah, not a pleasant way to go, I would say. But again, Keekeg saving the day dramatically and impressively. So there we go. So next chapter or 2 or 3, same time next week. So thanks for watching. Hope you're enjoying it. If you are, let me know. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Cheerio, bye.